Okay, here we go. So we're gonna get caught up with this Diddy appeal thing. Check this out.
Bestie at times.
It's a rather disparaging characterization, and I want to understand what you mean by it.
What I mean, that's not what I mean.
So yes, we have the audio from court as arguments were made both by the defense and the government. What's the court going to decide? Is Diddy going to be released from prison soon? Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber.
Give me 1 second. I got to turn
the heat. You guys know that we follow hundreds of cases a year, and each case has so much evidence that we said, you know what, let's do something here. We wanted to give you the Prosecution, which were connected to Combs hiring escorts and having them travel to different locations. But he was acquitted of the much more serious charges that were brought against him in the federal indictment: conspiracy to commit racketeering and sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. So the prosecution's star witness, as we remember, was Combs' ex, Cassie Ventura, who was in a relationship with him for 10 years. She claimed that she was forced to participate in what were called freak-offs, or hotel nights, where Combs would have an escort brought in, or that he would hire an escort to have sex with Cassie, sometimes for prolonged periods of time, and that this was an element of force and coercion that was used to get her to do this. And the prosecution posited that Combs used drugs to entice Cassie, or force Cassie, or coerce Cassie. And then there was a second alleged victim, identified as Jane Doe, to also participate in these marathon sex sessions. But the defense argued that whatever happened between Combs and his lovers was consensual, that it didn't add up to sex trafficking or even a violation of the Mann Act. That's the Transportation to Engage in Prostitution. Because according to the Mann Act, it is illegal to transport someone as part of interstate or foreign commerce for prostitution. But Combs' attorneys say he wasn't making any money off of these meetups. This was just what he did for a thrill. There was entertainment purposes. But the defense really here, and what our purposes for this discussion are, they are saying that what happened to Combs was unjust, that he shouldn't have been sentenced to what he was sentenced to. They believe that Judge Subramanian's sentence was too harsh. According to Combs' team, the typical sentence for just Mann Act convictions is like 15 months, but Combs was sentenced to 50 months. They claim it's the most ever that was given in a case like this under these circumstances. And they claim that the judge improperly considered evidence and accusations and conduct that related to the acquitted charges, so sex trafficking and racketeering, to guide his...
Now, this was a very controversial part of the Diddy case, chat. So the judge actually made a statement while he was going through his sentencing by saying that, hey, listen, he could take into account all the behavior that Combs was accused of, even if they weren't actually convicted of these things, because since they sat through the trial and they heard testimony, even if the jury went against some of those claims, he could make a gut ruling on what he heard and make it a beefier sentence or a lighter sentence. Obviously, it went bigger for Diddy than most.
Decision to guide his sentence. So I want to give you a little preview of the arguments that were made by both sides from their legal briefs, and then I'll give you the audio of what was argued in court. And then we're going to also bring on famed defense attorney Bradford Cohen to talk about the actual statements that were made on the record in court, get his prediction about whether or not Sean Diddy Combs is going to be released from prison earlier. So in the opening of its appellate brief, the defense states, quote, "The jury refused to authorize any punishment for coercive sex or conspiracy because the evidence showed there was none. The jury only authorized punishment for prostitution. It never authorized a sentence 4 times the typical sentence for that crime. The result was a perversion of justice. What is the point of a jury trial if you're vindicated on the most serious charges, but your sentence is driven by what you were acquitted of doing? That is the question at the heart of this appeal. The government has no answer. It doesn't even pretend to offer one. Instead, it offers up unpersuasive and hyper-technical arguments, misrepresents the record, cites outdated law, and ignores the elephant in the room, that it is both illegal and wrong to imprison a man for conduct he was acquitted of committing. He paid entertainers to create sexy scenes, and he and his girlfriends used role-playing and mood lighting, candles, costumes, and props. This amateur porn is protected by the First Amendment, and the government's arguments conflict with precedent. Indeed, pornography is everywhere today and produced and consumed by hundreds of millions through popular websites and social media. Combs should be released. His
So this is a sum of their brief.
convictions should be reversed, or the case at least remanded for resentencing, meaning sent back down to a lower court for resentencing. So all potential options here. How did the government respond? How did the prosecution respond? Well, in its own brief, the government wrote, the government's proof at trial established that for more than a decade and on hundreds of occasions, Combs paid dozens of male commercial sex workers or escorts to have sex with two of Combs' girlfriends, Ventura and Jane. These sex sessions, freak-offs or hotel nights, went on for hours or days as Combs directed the encounters, pleasured himself, and often filmed. Combs plied Ventura and Jane with drugs and was at times physically violent, hitting, kicking, and punching them before, during, or after freak-offs and hotel nights. Combs relied on his staff to book travel, including interstate and international trips, set up and clean hotel rooms, and deliver drugs, cash, and other supplies in connection with freak-offs and hotel nights. According to Combs, the district court should have closed its eyes to how he carried out his Mann Act offenses and abused his victims, violently beating them, threatening them, lying to them, and plying them with drugs. To do otherwise, Combs says, violated the Constitution and was unfair and unjust. Combs is wrong. Now, in addition to submitting these briefs, both sides had the opportunity to present their arguments in person, oral arguments, to the three-person appeals court. Again, the Second Circuit. Alexandra Shapiro, who also represented Combs at his original trial in district court, spoke first, and almost immediately, one of the judges interrupted.
This case presents an important issue about respect for jury verdicts and public confidence in our criminal justice system. Multiple justices have questioned the constitutionality of acquitted conduct sentencing. McClinton made clear—
Well, actually, I'm going to jump in right there, and I appreciate that you're leading with all that. If you were going to the question of the Sixth Amendment issue, is that where you were going?
Not quite.
Okay, I will. Why don't we lead one of your arguments is that it would violate the Sixth Amendment to consider acquitted conduct. Let's put it that way.
But Shapiro got back on track, made the argument that the court erred when it seemed to use issues that Combs was acquitted of, conduct that he was acquitted of, to essentially give him a more severe punishment. That's the allegation.
Isn't your argument really that what the government is doing here is mixing and matching? They're taking evidence from the claims that were acquitted to try to support the Mann Act sentencing for purposes of the Mann Act, but none of that jury was presented to the jury for purposes of the Mann Act.
Yes, Your Honor.
Is that a summation of what we're—
That's fair.
Well, he's mixing and matching is what he's doing, right? I mean, the district court here reached into the evidence that was used to support the government's RICO and sex trafficking case to for purposes of establishing the penalty under the Mann Act.
Correct, and he found coercion when the when the jury had not found coercion, including as to those two specific instances, because the government made those arguments and expressly told the jury, which correctly under the jury instructions, that if they found coercion, each of those instances would have been sufficient to convict on the substantive sex trafficking.
Were there
counts.
limiting instructions given or requested during trial that certain evidence would only be admissible with respect to certain of the charged offenses?
No, and that wouldn't really have worked here.
So then the prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Christy Slavic, represented the government at trial, provided her own arguments. But she also got some pushback.
Oh, my bad. I was muted. I said, keep in mind, Maureen Comey, the AUSA, that kind of was the head that brought this whole thing. She's been let go. She was the AUSA.
Judges.
Judge Subramanian improperly considered the aggravated manner in which the defendant carried out his Mann Act offenses, which is, of course, consistent.
You say aggravated manner. Let's talk about that. Why shouldn't we hold you to the way you prosecuted the case? You went to the jury and you said, this man did all these terrible things for purposes of the RICO conspiracy, for purposes of sex trafficking, and they acquitted him. And then on the Mann Act, it was just a sideshow, and you put him. I don't think there was any evidence or any live witness testimony. Just look at this, you said. Look at these charts. And now you want us to rely on all this acquitted.
This is circuit court, y'all.
That was presumably rejected for purposes of or to allow a district court for purposes of the guidelines calculation. So why should we hold you to what you argued to the jury?
Your Honor, I have several responses, but
Please.
first is that much of the conduct that the district court focused on in imposing the sentence was not acquitted conduct at all. In fact, it was admitted conduct. The extreme physical violence that took place in the context of these freak-offs
That's
and
not,
hotel...
okay, I get all that. I understand that. But that's not my question to you.
The theory is,
The
if
judge is
government
rocking with
made
Diddy
this
so far.
argument, doesn't that mean that the jury accepted that argument and didn't consider any other possibilities? And I don't think that that's a fair inference.
But what we're trying to do here is to figure out where, draw this line. So the jury acquitted on certain things and then convicted on other things. So what does a jury have to rely upon? Don't you think they're listening very intently to the closing argument? Isn't that going to be very, very important in their consideration?
Of course, Your Honor, of course. But the jury is, in this case, was properly instructed on each element of the Mann Act and had to find each element of the Mann Act met beyond a reasonable doubt.
Now, Shapiro had an opportunity for a short rebuttal for the defense.
I just in closing, 12 New Yorkers took 2 months out of their lives to serve on this jury. They listened to 34 witnesses, reviewed thousands of text messages, videos, and other evidence, and deliberated for 2.5 days. Their unanimous verdict was not guilty on the most serious charges, and the jury did not authorize punishment for sex trafficking or conspiracy, but that's what drove the sentence. Here, we submitted the evidence that my friend on the other side describes, which I would urge Your Honors to look at, which is at docket 510-4 of the district court, shows that this was the highest sentence ever for this type of charge with this type of criminal history. And in closing, this appeal has been expedited, and actually, I forgot to say, we'll rest on our briefs. We have also argued the convictions should be reversed.
Okay, all right. Chat, I think you guys kind of get it. They're going through this whole argument, and even if you hear like a little bit snippets of the circuit court judges, they're kind of really like hard on the prosecutors, saying, yo, what they're saying is making sense. Why aren't you guys judging him on what he got found guilty for? Why are you trying to bring other things into the matter? Obviously, we're going to keep hearing more about this. We're going to hear a decision on this, and also we'll hear what subsequent next actions is to come. All right. All right. So Diddy's about to be home free soon. I would think in the next probably couple of months. I think his case, his appeal looks really good, and I think because it has certain type of precedent building ideologies around it, where everyone would want to know, hey, if I'm charged with 5 crimes and I want to get found guilty of the least one with the least amount of penalty, do I still have to do time for these other things as well? Right? Cool. All right. Anyway,